Okay, you're very welcome along to our penultimate, our fourth EU election debate. And we have five candidates who are joining us, four of them with us right now. One of them is going to be joining us presently. We, of course, are in the Midlands Northwest constituency, and that constituency is a biggie. It comprises of Donegal, Cavan, Galway, Kildare, Leitrim, Longford, Louth, Mayo, Meath, Monaghan, Roscommon, Sligo, Westmeath and the city of Galway. There are 5 seats available, 27 candidates. And as I say, we've been introducing you to them over the course of this week. This is our second last panel, which was selected randomly. Charlotte Keenan is running, and we made every effort to try and contact Charlotte to give everyone a platform. Unfortunately, our contacts with her so far have gone unanswered, and I think it's a little late now. Right, okay, so what we're going to do is give our candidates a minute or two just to, I suppose, lay out their stalls and invite you, the listener, the voter, to consider them for your number one or highest preference after that. Let's say good morning, and I'm just going to go through the list as it's presented to me. Let's say good morning to Maria Walsh of, good afternoon, to Maria Walsh of Fine Gael. Maria, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Greg, and thanks for having this much needed debate. A lot of candidates, as you said, but a very important election upcoming.
For sure. Right. Why do you think people should place their trust in you again?
Yeah, my ask to the listeners, to the voters. So just over 15 days' time, we'll have the June 7th election for local and Europeans. I'm an experienced candidate. I got elected for the first time in 2019, and I've worked towards a couple of key different areas: supporting our farm families, supporting our growth of our SMEs and our entrepreneurs, particularly our female founders, dotted right throughout the 15 county constituency. And for me, it's incredibly important that I continue that work, looking at investment in rural communities, our fisheries communities that I had the pleasure of meeting just last week in Killybegs with our local election candidate, Manus Boyle. And of course, something we have talked about at length, Greg, is introducing the first ever EU mental health strategy. I worked along with a number of other pro-European candidates in these past 5 years and putting mental health as a political priority at an EU level. And I have a lot of more work to do on that, and delivering the first ever EU mental health strategy is something I believe we as a country and an EU need to be delivering for our constituents right across the constituency.
Okay, good morning. I beg your pardon, I'm normally on in the morning. Good afternoon. Anthony Cahill of the Irish People, living out of Galway. What do you do you want to say to the people?
Good morning. My name's Anthony Cahill. The reason I'm running, I believe something has gone very wrong with Ireland, and it's up to the Irish people to fix it. I believe our leaders have gone rogue, and it's time to replace them while we still have a nation. A century after gaining our freedom, the Irish people face challenges that threaten not only our way of life, but our very existence as a unique group of people. The government and the mainstream media, influenced by extremist NGOs and large international globalist bodies such as the EU, are promoting policies that are destroying Ireland and the Irish nation. These policies include open borders, an embrace of globalist agendas that confuse societal norms, and prioritise globalism over the interests of the Irish people. Most young people still live at home with their parents and are unable to move out, yet we welcome and house the world. This is insane. If young Irish people cannot be housed, they cannot start families. No families means no future for the Irish people. The migration levels at the moment are overwhelming our culture, way of life, and this must be stopped in reverse. The EU is the driving sort of centre of this, given that 70% of our laws come from there. So it's the belly of the beast. That's why I'm running.
Okay, and thank you for your time. Herman Kelly of the Irish Freedom Party. Good morning, Herman. Good afternoon,
good morning,
Herman.
Greg.
Just for those who may not be aware, what are the main campaign areas for you?
Well, I believe the Irish people are good enough to make their own laws and decide their own laws, their own budgets, their own borders. We've had enough as EU members that I was at a fishing hustings there last night while you presented it, Greg. You should know that. And it made clear that the common fisheries policy, the quota that they get, is decided by unelected bureaucrats in Brussels. It's our natural resources, which should not belong to the European Union, should not be divvied out by the EU. We should take back control of our laws, our money, and our borders. We are a net contributor to the EU budget for over 10 years. 2021, we gave 1.1 billion euro. The issue of EU open borders and free movement means that people like Joseph Puska, the man who murdered Aisling Murphy, Slovak Roma, was allowed to move into Ireland, no problem. This guy got free stuff for 10 years. He got free accommodation, free healthcare, free education for his kids. Irish taxpayers got up every morning and went out to work for that. That's not fair. That this guy contributed nothing to our country, and yet we, because of EU membership, have to subsidise this guy's lifestyle choices, which are bad for Ireland. EU open borders means that demand for housing goes up, house prices and apartment rental goes up, and our own young people cannot find a house to buy, cannot afford apartments to rent. And what are they doing? They're emigrating. Our Irish Freedom Party policy is to reduce demand for housing by controlling immigration, by controlling immigration and getting a handle. And basically, we will put Irish people first. Our priority is the Irish people, the benefit of the Irish people, and not for the desire of everyone to come here.
Okay. We'll come back and tease out many of those issues, and I suspect there might be other candidates who want to challenge you on some of the statements, but that's all part of the debate. Stephen Garland, running as an independent. Stephen, thanks for joining us. What are your key campaign issues?
Basically, health and disability would be my two primary drivers. I myself am living with PPMS, and I'm very much enamored, particularly to this constituency, by the fact that this constituency has the highest incidence rate of MS in the country by a large way. It's 1 in 800 across the entire country, the 9,000 people living with MS. But in Donegal, particularly Sligo and this region, there is 1 in 600 incidence rates. So it's a lot higher. It's something that's very, very real. It's very, very under resourced. And there's only one MS therapy centre in Sligo. When I'm in Ireland, I'm from Longford, and I'm not technically within their catchment area, but they allow me to take part in that. So I see a lot of and they bring in a lot of people. A lot of their clients are from this region, from Donegal, particularly Sligo, and in this North Leitrim, that whole catchment area. So it's it's something I live with. There's other issues with that. There's a lot of information doesn't get out there. The reason that I'm able to run for EU is because 6 years ago, I went to Moscow and I did what was a non-FDA approved treatment called HSCT. It's only been really recognised in the vernacular of MS Ireland and patient bodies like that, literally in the last year. And so there's an awful lot that needs to still get out to many people living with this illness. And I also live with disability. I've been disabled in Europe for the last, for a long, long time. I'm also now technically an Irish medical exile because I had to leave in 2023. I left for better health abroad. And currently I spend half my year in Barcelona and half here and I moved for health.
Okay.
So I'm all about health, disability.
All right, and we'll tease that out with you as well. Last but not least, Saoirse McHugh, who's running as an independent. Saoirse, why do you want people to vote for you?
Hi, Greg. Thanks for having me, and apologies about me being in the car. I just couldn't manage the schedule.
You could have got away with it if you hadn't said it. Continue.
Well, anyway, apologies, and yeah, thanks for having me. So, my name is Saoirse McHugh. I'm running as an independent in obviously the Midlands Northwest. I'm from Achill Island. I'm 33 years old, still living there. And I suppose I'm running because I really think we need a progressive vision of what rural Ireland could be. And I think we need to take climate and environmental action that will improve people's lives. And so there's so much environment and climate action that needs to be taken. But I'm really passionate about the point that it should be taken in ways that addresses kind of, I suppose, the nuts and bolts of people's lives. So this would be around food and land, water, like how do we deal with our water, both flooding, drought, and drinking water? In a country that rains so much, you would think we would have a plan. Transport, housing, the cost of electricity. I always think that we look at all this there's a lot of talk about renewables, and what we really need is state-owned renewables run for the public good. Like, I have no interest in everything being run by renewables, though, if nobody has houses. So I think I know there's an opportunity now. Like, so many things are changing over the next 5, 10, 15 years. And there's ways to make sure that those changes benefit everybody. And I also think we're at quite a pivotal time where, obviously we have a lot of problems like housing, like services, like health, as Stephen was saying, that have been building for decades. Like housing, for instance, is an issue because of the financialization of housing, because of lack of state investment in social housing over decades. And oftentimes maybe overly simplified solutions.
Okay, well, we can get into, if you don't mind, Saoirse, we can get into housing as a general conversation, but just in relation to the comments you've made about, the environment and actions that we need to take. Herman Kelly mentioned the hustings last night in Killybegs, and everyone was treated with respect, but there was only boos that I heard was as soon as the climate was introduced briefly into the conversation. Can someone who's campaigning on that and trying to talk about those issues and the reality it will impact on people's lives, can you get elected? Or is this campaign really just about getting your message out there?
Well, I don't know if I can get elected. I suppose I hope so. And I suppose one of the things is that whether people boo or not, or whatever party you're part of, climate and environmental issues affect everyone's lives. And so say there's been, climate action issues or policies that have been brought in that people are booing about. Like, the only climate policies that will ever work are the ones that people buy into. And if there's been so for instance, there's been bad housing policy, it doesn't mean there's no housing crisis, and it doesn't mean that we shouldn't respond. What it actually means is that there needs to be even more effort and a more concerted effort to get a housing policy that actually works for people. And I think it's the same with climate.
Maria Walsh, it is a tough subject, climate change, what we have to do with it in the west of Ireland, because often it feels like we are disproportionately disadvantaged in any transition.
Yeah, for sure. But I think to pick up from Saoirse's point and just to tie back, if you don't mind, Greg.
Whatever you want to do, carry on.
Yeah, on one or two other points. I mean, bear in mind the large listenership within Donegal, even further down to Galway and across to Louth, which we all are aiming to represent in the Parliament. When we're looking at our fishing quotas, we also are challenging historical measures put in place since before we joined in 73. That's one negative of that. However, to pick up from Saoirse's point, I mean, I had the pleasure of meeting fishing communities in Killybegs, between processors, between SMEs, between fishermen and women themselves. And one of the key asks was how they can continue to fish while also not tackling or removing the beds of our seas, because they understand better, I think, than anybody what it's like for that sustainable and circular economy that they're trying to provide food for their families. So I think there is a balance. I'm disappointed I wasn't there personally last night. I'd met the organisations the week prior with our Minister for State, Jennifer Carroll McNeill, but I'm disappointed to hear anything in relation to climate was getting a boo. Because,
no, I don't want to over amplify that, to be honest with you, because it was all very, very respectful. I'm just saying that was just the subject that there seemed to be a little bit more of a pushback than others. I should have been more clear on that.
But to tie in, and certainly I know Saoirse is well able to tackle her own and debate her own, but I think what is key for us in the west of Ireland is working hand in hand and having the voices of our farming, fishing and rural communities at the table, which to many people that I've met over the last weeks and months or even the 5 years, it's about connecting that disconnect. But we also have to look at where our country, particularly the west of Ireland, has grown since we've joined in 73. Yes, there's challenges, but we've also had billions of investment into from the EU into our countries. You don't have to go too far down from the radio station, Greg, and see the European Direct Library, the ATU, which is getting incredible funding and tapping into the network we have across the EU, our roads and other parts of infrastructure. There is challenges, not ignoring that, but our relationship in the EU, considering we have a number of challenges ahead, is incredibly important. I say that as a pro-European candidate.
Yeah, before we talk about maybe, and I'll come to you, Herman, in a moment about the role of Europe and its benefits and what have you, but seeing as fishing has been mentioned a couple of times, and it's a hot topic, obviously, but I also recognise that in different parts of the constituency, it might not necessarily be as big a issue as other. But that being said, MEPs hopefully will represent the entire area and all its interests. Anthony Cahill from the Irish People's Party, do you have a view on supporting the fishing and farming industries? Two very different, but also two very similar industries with challenges.
Yeah, the fishing industry over my lifetime, has just shrank with the quotas. The harbour of Galway used to be one time full of trawlers. It's now empty. I think there's maybe one or two trawlers that sometimes visit. Rossaville will be the nearest large port, and we've just seen the quotas given away. One of the things that, if you look at any of those electronic sort of monitoring systems for fishing, you'll see all the foreign trawlers that fish off our coast. So obviously there's an issue of quota. There's another issue with, the dumping of fish that are caught. It's complete waste, especially given, the amount of hunger around the world. So fishing, Ireland gets a very bad deal with fishing. I think the way fishing is organized in the EU is wasteful. When it comes to farming, I don't know much about farm. I live in a housing estate, but I do know farmers, and the one complaint is it's just constant regulation, with the new directives coming in, and it feels like they're being pushed off the land. We've seen a lot of protests in Holland, and I wonder, is that the direction of travel, where you have the most productive farmers in the world who are being forced out of farming? And that's what it feels like for both fishing and farming here at the moment.
The Dutch are certainly doing well with the fishing. Herman, I will come to you in a moment. I just want to give Stephen an opportunity to come in now. I'm trying to work sort of back and forward and back. Stephen?
Yeah, on farming up here in County Longford, so we're right part of the what used to be the lakelands, where we had a tourism industry, where we had built on fishing, and we had lakes like Lough Shiel and Lough Gown, tons of like a valid, viable tourism industry that really was wiped out by intensive farming. So we have to find a balance somewhere within this ecological argument that's going on, and about protecting all of our custodians of the land, that they can do it more effectively, and maybe make seismic changes. I believe there has to be a seismic change towards within this Green New Deal. There is a movement towards hemp as a cash crop, and how it can be exploited in many industrial uses. It is the greatest sequester of all plants. It's 20 times more effective than trees, for instance. So I would like to see if there could be a shift. That it certainly needs compensation. France, for instance, is a country that has really embraced this. They now have 9 processors. The biggest challenge is processing. So Ireland cannot develop a hemp industry until it has a processor. And so there is only one processor in the whole of Spain, but Macron is really embracing this. And there are now 9 in France. So we're kind of being left behind in one area of farming that is there, and we should be part of that. So there's need for change, and that change has to be subsidized and funded, and being allowed farmers to make these dramatic
diversification,
changes, and that has to be.
Yeah, diversification, but done in a way that brings farmers with them. Okay, thank you for that. Herman Kelly, I'll stay with you just on 2 topics and then work back through the room, just in relation to the issue of fishing, which is inescapable, obviously, in our constituency, because Europe has such an influence on it, and we are talking about the EU elections.
Yeah. Well, I believe it's disgraceful that EU boats have 85% of the quota in Irish national waters. I was saying last night, in negotiations, unless you make it clear when you're offered a bad deal by the EU, unless you make it very clear that you're willing to walk away, they will keep on hammering Irish fishermen, as they have done for the last 51 years. We've got a terrible deal from EU membership. Also on farming, every Irish MEP in December 2023 voted for what they call the Nature Restoration Law, which is basically an EU land grab of good, arable land, especially along the Shannon in the Midlands. Like, the world is short of food. We need more food. We need food security. The EU has turned against farmers now because of environmental fanaticism. Climate alarmism is the foundation of the new attitude of the EU towards farmers. The EU is now going to do to farmers what they did to fishermen over the last 50 years. My attitude is that we need to take back control. Ireland and the Irish people need to take back control of our farmland, the regulation of our farmland, and also our fishing. Our fishing waters, the quota on that should be decided by the Irish people. We have to make clear that we're willing to walk away if they give us a bad deal.
Okay, and Herman, I'm going to come back to that because our position in Europe is worthy of a debate in and of itself, but you attributed a vote to Maria Walsh, and I think, Maria, you indicated that you want to...
It's on my Twitter.
But I'm not disputing it, and I'm not going to come back to you, but I think Maria Walsh wanted an opportunity to come in there.
Yeah, just to clarify, actually, not all, and Herman, with greatest respect, because I know you work in the Parliament, not all Irish MEPs voted in favour of the nature restoration. I did, along with Fine Gael MEPs, but not all Irish did.
They did in December 2023. They all did.
You want to check that one, so it's important that we're factually sharing information to listeners versus not. And in terms of the use of land grab or land steal, that couldn't be any further from the truth. Actually, it's voluntary measures. We have commitment from the Irish government and the Department of Agriculture that any land voluntarily given to rewetting, to meeting our nature restoration targets, would be met with financial packages. That's very clear, and we've stated that categorically.
Yeah, but there are concerns that the people of Donegal don't want to be living in an extended national park either.
And it's fallen for now as well. It's fallen for now. What about later?
Absolutely. As someone from a small farming background, I can appreciate that. This is where truth and non-truth gets muddied. And so, just to be very clear to listeners, if a farmer wants to offer their land to rewetting, then they get paid for it. Whoever is listening to this and doesn't want to, then they're not required to do
Saoirse,
that.
did you want to come in there? Saoirse, did you want to come in there? Saoirse
McHugh? Yeah, I just want to
flood the land.
Okay, Herman, I'll come back to you. Saoirse, just begin from the beginning there. Sorry, to make sure we hear you.
Yeah, I just wanted to agree there. So that, like, it's important that there's kind of facts being put out here. The Nature Restoration Law provides targets and a framework for government, and there's no mechanism in it to force anyone to do anything. So I'm personally now running the family farm, and what I was thinking from it was, this would be a great way to diversify income, especially on-farm income, because it's a choice. And I don't know why people would argue against people having a choice. But on agriculture and fishing, I think there's one kind of pattern that connects to both of them, is the lack of any sort of forward planning. So it's all very well to say, like, the EU is ruining farming, but without the EU, I can't even imagine what farming would look like in this country. The money that the EU gives to farming from the CAP is enormous. And I really think, what we've got is a common agricultural policy that was set up to produce enough food after World War II, basically, to make sure the continent would never go hungry again. And it's built since then, but of course, labor efficiency has gone up, and we now produce a huge amount of food. And what we've got now is a whole load of other issues around agriculture that kind of aren't being dealt with. And what I would be kind of, I suppose, working towards would be an integrated governance of everything around agriculture, with the kind of focus of it being food. Because we've got an issue now where food in the supermarket has been sold too cheap for farmers to make a living, but it's too expensive for people to buy.
Okay.
We export 90% of the food we produce, and we import most of the food we eat, often from areas with drought issues. And just one other thing.
Briefly, please.
Like, it's all very well. It's all very easy for politicians, especially. Like I remember Coveney back when the milk quota was being abolished, saying don't worry about emissions. Teagasc admitted they never thought about what to happen to dairy calves. You know, the nitrogen derogation, people were warning for years that water quality wasn't good enough and that would have to be reduced. And it's all very well and easy for politicians to say, don't worry about that, expand, rent more land, buy more capacity. But then when reality collides with people who've expanded or, you know, really gone into debt and put their livelihoods on the line, those same politicians say, oh, this is a conspiracy or against you, instead of saying, okay, we should have planned for this and we should plan for this going forward.
Okay, Herman, I'm going to come back to you. Stephen Garland. Did you want to come in on that?
We celebrate providing milk to the Dutch dairy industry. We celebrate providing powdered milk to the Chinese. But we keep on developing this national herd, and I think that there has to be a point where there's. The EPP have been rolling through. All we're doing is promoting this big farming, big subvention into one narrow thing that we're celebrating the wrong things with farming. That's how I see it. Intensive farming is not where we need to go, and it's only damaging our environments. The nitrates levels all over have been growing. They've been we keep on getting told by politicians in Europe and everywhere that our nitrate levels are reducing. It's not a fact. So the point is that nitrate levels continue to rise in the different segments in the country, and that's destroying our environment.
But farmers would argue that they have changed their farming practices. They have reduced pollution in certain areas, and that wasn't factored in at all, really, or not given any credit or consideration when new nitrates.
It's not a fact. It's not a fact, man. That's not a fact, okay. And it's kind of it reduced for a while, and now it's coming back. So over at the period within Teagasc, within all the regions that they have studied, it is not reduced. So we're not really reducing the nitrate.
And also, Greg, sorry, can I just come
briefly, because I want to bring
quickly on the nitrogen, because I know I've been talking a lot. But that is another exact example. Like we have 7% more rain than we had 30 years ago, and this has been predicted and this has been talked about, and this affects runoff. And these sort of things have to be factored in, because now... But
you would be described as a climate alarmist by certain people.
We also, with great respect...
Can I just clarify, Craig? I have worked in the European Parliament for 15 years. I know how to check the voting records. On my Twitter, at Herman Kelly, the link to the voting record is there. In December 23, every Irish MEP voted for there. Now, Maria... two of the MEPs, Ming and Luke, Chris McManus, changed their voting record when it came around, when it didn't matter after the final vote on the trilogue. But every Irish MEP...
Well, they're not here, but I take your point that you're wanting to get a go at them. I'll come back to you, but I haven't brought Anthony in here.
Thing on the boundary. If the state floods land beside farmers, if that's re-wetted or flooded, the farmers next door do not have a choice, because the water table goes up, everyone's land is flooded.
Yeah, so that is a major concern.
And economic compulsion,
it's not flooding.
Make sure it's not free.
Raise water table by like a half an inch. But it does point to the fact that we do need landscape scale planning.
Okay.
Of like how we're...
Can I bring Anthony Cahill in? Sorry, Anthony, thanks for being so patient. My apologies.
No problem. Look, farming, as I said, I don't know much about it, but when you look at, the budget, I understand 40% of it, is being spent on climate measures, and, it'd be my view that we got a serious environmental problem, but we're chasing rainbows with around climate. I wouldn't be a believer.
So you believe there's no climate crisis at all?
No, I don't believe in man-made climate change. I believe that when you look at the research, I look to Professor John Clauser, who won the Nobel Prize for Physics in 2022, and if he's saying there isn't a problem, there is,
But could I not? I'm not being facetious, but could I not find a hairdresser that says I've got nice hair if I really wanted to believe I had a lovely head of hair?
He's not a hairdresser. He won the Nobel Prize for Physics.
Well, which is better
you also have
qualification.
Professor Nielsen, who was the chair of the Sea Level Committee for the IPC reports. He resigned. When he was asked, an extensive interview of, was around sea levels, he said, look, it's the sea rises, the land rises. He says it's nothing spectacular.
Okay.
And when he was pushed further on what's going on here, there's nothing here.
Stephen, did you want to come back in there on those comments?
Well, I spend a lot of time out in Europe, and while we have the climate is happening all across Europe, it manifests in different ways. We're at the end of a lot of supply chains here in Ireland. You're going to be paying more for your wine. The grapes are in trouble. Olives have gone through the roof in Spain. It's gone up by 300% because they can't grow olives. There's the hailstones are coming so hard into our Andalusia is one of the great baskets of fruit and veg for the whole for Ireland. So we have a food security issue, and the food security issue is being affected by climate change. And if we don't wake up to that, if we don't accept that there is climate change and there's fires are problems, floods are problems, it's more dramatic. And in Ireland we have more dramatic flooding. And Saoirse is completely right that the reason that the nitrates have not gone down is really about the flooding. The floodplains is subverting all of our great efforts.
Maria Walsh.
I just wanted to bring it back into what, as MEPs, we can do for listeners in the European Parliament and for the next 5 years. So a couple of big things. One, we just recently voted on a CAP modification, which allows national governments like our own to adjust if there's, as we've had, a fodder crisis, extreme weather changes. The next, as we build towards the common agricultural policy, and I think it was a comment made earlier, how much of a percentage of the overall EU budget that is. It's about 30%, and it's important that we, as a small member state on the west periphery of the EU, between two third countries now connected to obviously Northern Ireland, which is not in the EU, while we have privileges, we certainly need to make sure we're getting as much of that common agricultural policy.
But just in relation to that, though, Maria.
And I think for the climate, if you just let me, sorry, Craig, for the climate, we still have to meet our ambitions, but you cannot meet them if the listeners here are not with us at the table.
Well, I do get that, but you talk about what our MEPs can actually do. But people will vote for a myriad of reasons. But in terms of agriculture, agri meetings, you've been called out for not attending any agri meetings. So people sent you out. You can correct that, but I just want to put the point to you that
just to clarify something that is absolutely farcical from another candidate. I have attended several agri meetings. I will be very clear on this. This is the benefit of working in a larger team like Fine Gael. Mairead McGuinness, who is now a commissioner, when elected in 2019, or re-elected, I should say, took the Agri Committee. But that does not mean I don't submit amendments. I don't join meetings. I've worked very closely in the Agriculture Committee, along with my agriculture colleagues in the EPP group, around mental health supports, like Embrace Farm, I should say.
Okay, and just in relation to the candidate that made that claim last night, he said that he can't attend everything himself, and he actually sends people on his behalf. So I thought it was interesting to call you out. But anyway, Herman Kelly, come back in there.
Well, carbon dioxide is necessary for photosynthesis, and NASA have shown over the last 35 years, because of increasing CO2 levels globally, that the Earth has actually greened over the last 35 years. But taxing people does not change the weather. Now, I regard that the climate has always changed, the climate will always change. But taxing people into the ground, all these
when you talk about, when we look at these
supported the carbon
when
tax.
we look at the extremes of weather, Herman, and of course there is a big difference between weather and climate, right? But when we see the extremes and we see patterns over time and we see temperature changes that we can actually track post-industrialization, you claim you are of the belief that that's just the ebb and flow of the world's climate. You don't believe anything that we're doing is contributing to that.
There is a problem. I believe there is a severe problem with a loss of habitat, loss of biodiversity. Like throwing chemicals into the water is not good long term, and throwing sulfur dioxide, nitrous oxide into and nitrates,
you believe that affects the environment?
It is damaging to the environment, but carbon dioxide is good. It's necessary for photosynthesis. It is not a poison.
Right,
And
okay,
the Irish Freedom Party will oppose the carbon tax because it makes our meat, our milk, our petrol, and our heating oil more expensive.
Okay.
It is unnecessary and it's unjust.
All right, that
why
is
we
your
will
belief, and
oppose
others
carbon
believe
tax.
differently. If someone wants to come back on that down the line, they can. But a vote for you, Herman Kelly, is a vote for Ireland's Brexit, Irexit. We are
Our
seeing
long-term goal is to
and
leave.
we're watching at the moment the British Prime Minister saying stuff it, nothing's going to change. I'm going to have to call her an early election because their economy's in the toilet. Their interest rates aren't going to come down. They don't have any headspace to adjust taxation to try and buy an election later in autumn. They've chucked their hands up and says, right, we'll go to the people because we're in such a, well, I won't say the word. Why would anyone want that for Ireland?
For the Irish Freedom Party, it's a long-term goal. It may take 20, may take 25 years to convince the electorate and to move towards a referendum and ask a simple question: do you want to make your own laws, decide your own budgets and borders, or do you want to have all these issues decided by people you didn't elect in Brussels? I believe the Irish people are more than good enough to make our own law. But actually, talking about the CAP budget, we're a net contributor to the EU budget for over 10 years. All that money comes from, which it actually has reduced as a percentage of EU spending by roughly 50% over the last 30 years. But that money ultimately comes from the Irish taxpayer, not from the European Union. We're a net contributor. Actually, the EU has taken 215 billion worth of fish out of our waters. They've imposed 64 billion bank debt. They've taken 20 billion of
But we've
our
benefited
pension
too,
fund.
though. But things have
We've
come in.
benefited by 44 billion euro cash from the EU budget, according to government figures.
Okay.
But overall,
I'll come back. I just want to move up my screen here.
Sure.
Anthony Cahill, do you believe our position, our future, is in Europe, or is a vote for you eventually a vote for Irexit?
It's probably a vote to get out eventually. I don't see the EU lasting. The EU, when it started off with the EC, was, fabulous idea. It did great things, but now I see it as a dying organization. With the migration issue, you see you have demographic issues. You've mental health issues. Europe is dying. Western civilization, as we know it, Europe was built on faith and reason. Reason being the science. We found out what happened to science during COVID. It was the science. And you see, with anything now, there's no conversation allowed. There's only one way. The value system was based on Christianity. And in Ireland, people are very kind, and people forget that it was the Catholicism of people that actually it makes people kind and empathic. As we get away from both those areas, and become more secular, it creates a vacuum for the likes of Islam to come in. But also, in the meantime, you have huge issues with people with mental health. And they're just.
And Anthony, do you think people want to go back to that Ireland you described, where it was run by the Catholic country and everything that came from that? That women were oppressed. That people had to live their lives in secret. Do you think that the general population of Ireland wants to see a return to those days?
I'm not talking about returning to anything like that. What I'm just saying is you're asking, was I in favor of us leaving the EU? What I'm saying to you is Europe doesn't believe in itself anymore.
Okay.
The societies are collapsing.
All right.
The family structures are collapsing. So what's going to happen? What I'm saying to you, if it doesn't get back to having a value system, which originally was based on faith, you can separate the faith from the actual church. What I'm saying is that's a value system. That's what made Europe great.
Okay.
Was science and logic went married with a value system.
Okay, I didn't know. I knew what Herman's position was. I wasn't familiar with Anthony's. He sees our future eventually out of Europe, believes Europe is on life support. Maria Walsh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't paraphrase. That's what I heard. Maria Walsh, what say you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really struck by the last two interventions. I mean, from someone like myself who is sees what a politician is, and through my eyes, it's to be of service to the community. I sit in a Christian Democratic group. That's the EPP group. It's the largest group. Everything I do is I would hope of value to the constituents. But you know, to Greg's point earlier, with the greatest respect for those listening, this is what Euroscepticism is, and this is what Brexit. We are having the conversation of a country like the United Kingdom leaving the EU again, and it was morphed into absolute nonsensical language about we are better on our own than in a political solidarity structure like the EU. We have benefited greatly, and I say that to women listening who saw the removal of the marriage bar over 50 years ago, to the LGBTI individual listening right now in Donegal who's wondering how the hell they can exist and still develop and form like anybody else, to the person who is calling now Donegal their home, like Ukrainian communities or any community member. We are better in the EU than we are without.
Just in relation to that point, Maria, you know,
for a pro-European candidate who actually wants to work with people on behalf of people.
Just in relation to that, Maria, and I think people what will probably conclude from it, or text or message in that there is also a concern with migration, that many of those coming to Ireland, some would say, whether it's the truth or not, would be of a cultural or religious background that could in some way see us going back in terms of our liberalisation. Do you see where that concerns from? Is there anything to that?
I think people are coming like Irish people did in the generations gone by, built, created communities right throughout the world, and with them came their religion. Should they have celebrated Catholicism or any other religion? But I think we might be moving off the target too of what is the benefit of us being in the EU and what is.
Well, it's about the EU Migration Pact as well.
Well, I'll tell you what we'll do. Herman, we'll come back. We'll come back to that more specifically. I just learning where our candidates see our future in Europe. Maria, do you feel you've made your point just in terms of our future in Europe and the benefits of Europe?
Listen, I would hope anybody listening, and that's who we're speaking to, understands the benefits of having a pro-European candidate from the west of Ireland working on their behalf in the EU. Okay. Yes, do we have challenges? And I know we'll get into more, but our relationship in the EU is a hell of a lot better than outside of the EU, and our best example is the United Kingdom, as you outlined just now.
Stephen Garland, what's your view about, do you see our future in Europe, even maybe a stronger position with Europe or out?
No, totally, man. I'm in there. I was born in 1972. That's when we joined this big club. And to be honest, I've lived a big part of my life there. I've lived in Finland. I've lived in Holland. I've lived in Belgium. I've lived all over this. I hablo Castellano, falo Portuguese. So I am very well traveled within this. And there's so much to learn and pick and choose from. Take the best that Europe has to offer. People that the Dutch can't plumb to save their lives. The Finns are amazing at plumbing and doing. There's all. We have so much that we can draw from these different cultures. What's happening in Ireland is happening too fast, and it's like we have a war in Europe, and that's a huge issue. And we have all that Ukrainian migration that has really put what was already a system that was so much under pressure in terms of health, in terms of housing, and all these things that we're discussing. And anti-immigration pact, it was an opt-in in the beginning, but it's another example of the democratic deficit that exists in Europe. And the EPP, who Maria is absolutely, she's going to vote whatever the EPP tell her. And that's
not factual.
Well, what is Fine Gael? Have you ever voted against the EPP?
Yes, I voted against it for fracked gas. I voted against it for nature restoration. I voted against it for further equalities for people, not just some, but for all. I voted against it for mobility issues.
On a number
I
of
brought
occasions.
my group around for equal pay or for women in various sectors to break that 14% pay gap. I brought my group around with me around making mental health a priority at EU level. So I'm happy to debate all of that, but let's just be really, really clear on what's real and what's not.
Right. Okay. So so I point taken there, but I believe that everything that you were voting, you were on EPP, so that's EPP goes with a certain strand, and they've been the dominant force in the EU for the past 20 years. So, and the EU is for all the other things we're discussing here, has been moving in wrong directions by 2 or 3 people. I'm very pro-European, so let's get that
all right, Anthony.
very clear.
I appreciate that. Saoirse McHugh, independent. You see our future very much, do you? It's a question, sorry, it sounds like a statement. In Europe?
Yeah, I do. And I think you can realize that Ireland's future probably is in Europe and still be highly critical and still fight for a Europe that is better. Like there's a lot of things that Europe does politically that I don't agree with, but kind of on the whole, yeah, we see what happened with Brexit. You know, people tend to use like people seeking international protection or whatever as a scapegoat. Like, look at this is a big.
Well, can I stay with you on that? Can I stay with you on that, Saoirse, if that's okay, and then we'll move through because whether you try and steer the local election debates in one way or another to try and cover all the issues, it seems to come back to migration in terms of what the candidates say is the greatest concerns, in terms of what the voter want people to answer questions on. Let's go back to Brexit. You can talk about NHS and buses and all that type of stuff. An awful lot of that eventually ended up being about migration. The next UK election, very likely in mainland Britain, to start the conversation about the Rwanda plan versus Labour's plan. And in Europe as well, especially with the EU Migration Pact, in the way that was really, it's been on the back burner for a long time. We're coming to an election, next thing you know, boom, it seems to be there. So even though an MEP's role is not necessarily directly involved with migration or whatever it might be, that's an awful lot of what people are going to be voting on. So what is your view on the national, European/national way we are dealing with immigration in this country?
Yeah, well, I suppose just to say there's a stark difference I've noticed between canvassing on the doors. Like migration is not coming up the same amount you would expect. Like if you look at the media coverage of it, the majority of things that are coming up really I've found is housing, cost of living, and then hyper localized issues like, you know, transport or water or something like that. But I actually haven't. I've been speaking to a good few different people canvassing. I've been surprised at how little migration has been coming up, like compared to housing and compared to the airtime it's getting. In terms of Ireland's role and the EU's role is, well, first of all, kind of on Brexit, like exactly, you can see it was a big thing. It was all about migration. And of course, you know, Brexit happened and nothing obviously has been solved because there was no answer there. There's no solution there. And that's the same thing that's happening here. You see people trying to conflate the housing crisis with, and I won't say migration, I suppose I'll say people seeking international protection, because lots of people come here from Europe to work. Lots of people come here from outside Europe to work on work permits. These are totally different. A lot of people from Ireland leave. That's all migration. A lot of people from Ireland work in the EU, work in Australia.
But do you believe that we should? Do you believe we should stay within the European model, or should we evoke any opt-outs that we might have and say, look, maybe we can do more into the future, but at the moment we cannot do any more. As some people, they don't have a problem with migrants. It's the immigrants. It's the amount of them. Do you think we should be doing anything in that regard?
I think it would be almost. Like, I think it's crucial that Europe does work together. Like that, I've also been to Lesbos years ago, helping people arrive, helping them get set up, and just kind of on that. Even if you drive somebody to from where they landed to a reception center, that's counted as trafficking. But like, the EU needs to resource those countries properly to center dignity and process people, because these camps that people are being held in are atrocious.
Okay.
And I really think, like, you know, Europe does share a border. Like the Mediterranean is the most dangerous border in the world. And Ireland is part of Europe. And I do think there should be a coordinated response. That is to say, though, I don't agree that the EU Migration Pact is good. I think it further cements in this process of border externalization, which has resulted in thousands of people being captured.
I get you. I can come back to you a little bit more.
Isn't it the great example of the EU law
Greg.
happening without any real, discussion within the sovereign nations like Ireland? I mean, the EU
Not a sovereign nation.
Okay, Stephen, I'll come back to you because I was at you before I went to Saoirse, and I want to bring Herman Kelly in on this issue. In terms of immigration is a big one for you, Herman. Of course, Brexit, the promise was that, we get control of our borders back. That wasn't delivered, or it certainly wasn't delivered. So what would be the advantage to Brexit in a migration or immigration context?
So we're members of the European Union. Brexit is a long-term goal. In the meantime, what is coming up, the EPP, Maria Walsh, she voted for the EU Migration Pact. The EU, like the Treaty of Amsterdam gives Ireland, we have to opt in the areas of justice and home affairs. Now, the bottom line is, since 1995, our population has increased by 1.5 million. That's 42% in just over 30 years. Increased immigration increases.
Unmute there. Sorry, please, Herman.
Young people are then forced to emigrate. We need to take control of the numbers and the quality, the qualifications of the people who come in here. We, the Irish people, should decide how many people we need to come into our country, what qualifications they have. Have they got something to contribute? We must stop this economic migration where people just coming in to get free stuff, free housing.
Do we have any responsibility to take a proportion of those that are fleeing war or in hardship? So in other words, we can't necessarily stop. Yeah, go ahead.
Genuine refugees who are fleeing war, but the vast majority of people coming into Ireland are here for economic reasons, and they're not fleeing war at all. The vast majority of people come in here through EU open border. But one thing I will...
Sorry, are you talking about
I will go back
people?
to Maria Walsh. Sorry, Saoirse has said in the past that she's in favour of open borders. So the vast majority of people in Ireland at the minute, 79% of people, according to polls, are opposed to more immigration. Mm-hmm. So that's the mainstream view. The extreme, reckless view is to support open borders like Fine Gael.
Okay, but before I bring Anthony and Herman, in that timeline that you've outlined, right, we're told we have 100% employment. We have massive gaps in certain areas. No workers to do that work. We're running last year an €8+ billion surplus. Is that, some might say, that's proof that what we're doing is working?
No, it's a proof that Ireland is failing because many of our young people are emigrating. 21,000 young people went just to Australia last year. We should run our society and our economy in such a way that it's for the benefit of Irish people, and we should really be encouraging and facilitating changing laws and changing the taxation system to make it easier for young people to remain in Ireland and for young people to come back to Ireland.
Anthony Cahill,
our job is not to export to the rest of the world.
Yeah, Anthony Cahill, do you believe there's an acceptable level of immigration? I know it's certainly on my list. It's one of your top. What do you think we should be doing or could be doing?
We need to close the borders and stop this insanity right now. Ireland is being planted. It's a globalist plantation. You have, in the 1700s during the plantation Ulster, a Munster, you'd between 80 to 150,000 arrived here. In 2022, up to a quarter of a million came here. In 2023, according to Pascal Donoghue, 180,000 came here. That's 430,000. Mm-hmm. This is insanity.
So who's planting in Ireland, and what's the end game?
Okay, this is a globalist plantation, and what's going on across Europe? It's not just in Ireland. This is happening right across Europe.
Who's doing it?
It's
who's
the
pulling
EU,
the strings?
The EU and the UN. Like you had, Peter Sutherland, who was former chairman of Goldman Sachs. He was also a member of the Bilderberg and a mentor to Simon Coveney, the Minister of Foreign Affairs. He was the UN migration envoy, and he said very clearly, repeatedly, publicly, that the role of the EU should be to undermine the homogenous ethnic groups of Europe. So and what you're seeing right now is exactly that. You're seeing massive migration in. Now,
is that are you paraphrasing, or is that factual?
No. Well, I'm paraphrasing, but there's videos of him in the House of Lords saying it.
That's
No.
not a direct quote from Peter Sunderland, who
No,
who
he did.
has
He did
discussed
say.
another
He
European
did say. He did say. I'm paraphrasing, but he did say to undermine the homogeneity of the European nations. That was said.
With closed borders, will we be allowed leave? Or
Okay, don't be ridiculous. Of course,
well, like,
you know, like,
is it
like
like,
that's just you know,
well,
like
no, like
this
if
is
borders are
serious.
closed, like, are we
What you
allowed to
have
work
a
in Spain?
situation is,
But Anthony,
where
but Anthony, just in relation to that, to really, we couldn't really go and work and live in any country that homelessness really and with a straight face, could we? So you know, would we not potentially, if I
no,
go to
what I'm talking about is we need to stop the mass migration and importation of huge numbers of people.
what would you do with the 46% odd of healthcare workers that are migrants or migrant backgrounds?
Okay, that's a very good question, because right now there's a ban on the HSE employing people in Ireland.
In
but
certain
there
areas,
was no ban.
there's no ban on an awful lot of it.
No. It was reported.
It's
in
those
December
yeah,
in the Business Post.
yeah, but those reports are wrong. There is recruitment ongoing in the HSE.
No, the recruitment, it was for a lot of areas, it was stopped locally, but there was no, in the headline, it was very clear, but farm workers were still being recruited overseas. This is the Business Post.
Yeah.
Now, the thing about it is you might remember 10 years ago, outside the hospitals, the Irish Nurses Organization protesting, saying, give us decent working conditions, give us decent wages, otherwise we have to leave. Now, where are they? They're gone.
So
we're getting other people's workers as we ship our own overseas.
So would you like to see those working in the health service to leave, in inverted commas? Now, many of them are second, third generation and have families and children here, and they're living. But are you saying that you would like them to leave?
What I'd like to see is people being able to stay in their own country and work here. So they wouldn't, and that would also should allow the people overseas stay in their country, because what's going on with this globalism is it's not just about destroying Ireland, it's about destroying every country.
Okay, right.
With 4,000, can I just facts? There's 4,000 Irish doctors working abroad at the minute. And we've all seen the photographs of the large number of nurses in Sydney and Canberra, all over Australia and Canada. And remember, the photographs give us a reason to come home. It's our job as politicians to change the laws and taxation system to give these people an opportunity to stay in Ireland and to come home.
We're coming late to our time. Maria Walsh, do you want to come back in on that? It's so divisive and it's a difficult one, but there's a lot of views out there along these lines.
Yeah, there's so many areas to pick up on that, but just for some clarity. So the Migration Pact that I and my colleagues in Fine Gael voted on and are working towards in this current mandate, along with our Irish colleagues serving at a national and local level, is for a fair and firm pact. And what that means is right across the 27 member states, we have, for the first in time, because this has been debated for well over in excess of 10 years, we're very fortunate in many ways because we're on the most west periphery. If you look at what Saoirse had mentioned earlier, I traveled to Lesvos, just off Greece. If you look at Italy and Greece, they have thousands of people arriving into the EU, into Italy.
So the rest of EU,
Greece,
including us, would have to take their share.
But just seeking protection, be it through climate, be it through war, be it through other political persecution, be it through their sexual identity, various forms, and they're seeking. There's also, much like our own historical lived experience, for economic gains. And what this pact will do is ensure that we are processing applications of those seeking
But just
refuge.
in relation to that, Maria, sorry to cut across you, why all of a sudden would we be able to start processing? We couldn't do it. Direct provision's a basket case. We aren't processing people now, even though we have the ability to. We aren't deporting people. We're kind of asking them to leave. And we're standing by as people escaping the Rwanda plan flood across, well, I don't use language like that, come across in great numbers across the border from north to south. Like, we could be, if we're not doing anything now or doing very little now, the EU Migration Pact doesn't do anything to sort of...
To that point, up to this point, Greg, and you're right, there's various challenges and the broken system is broken right across the EU. Hence the reason why an EU migration and asylum pact is required, so that we are working together, so that not one side of the country or the EU is is moving through
Okay.
applications of those seeking protection, and then others are not. So it's around that solidarity pack.
Right,
And
okay.
can I also just flag, 1 in 5 of our healthcare are born outside of Ireland. 1 in 5 of our construction company are born outside of Ireland. We need people who want to work, who are skilled.
Well, what about
workers.
the argument, Maria, that if we
Seeking
make this,
protection.
what about it if we make this country a better place, that we would not be exporting our professionals, or they wouldn't have to leave? This county I'm talking from, he is devastated by people emigrating. You know, if we had a system whereby they were supported and able to live here and get a home and what have you, we wouldn't need the level of workers coming into the country.
Should put Irish people first. We shouldn't be patty last in our own country.
Can I just come in? Like, what you often get is anti-migrant activists who will point out real issues like health, like housing, stuff like that, and then instead of proposing the real solutions, because yes, of course, everyone deserves good working conditions and everyone deserves proper housing. And the thing is, like, there's no set limit to, there's no perfect population density. Like, people create the need for more jobs. Yeah. People create the need for more nurses. People create the need for more schools. Because, like, so, you know, if we were to follow the logic of the of like anti-migrant activists and stuff, is there a, surely then there's a level at which we couldn't have any more babies.
Okay, yeah.
Like, there is
but
no
listen,
perfect...
we have to leave it with the funny. The thing that's interesting is that, you know, Maria and Saoirse could be right, although they disagree. Anthony and Herman could be right, though they disagree. But the message from Herman and Anthony is far easier to consume and get one's head around than the other message. Stephen, I thought you had gone. I'm sorry. I like the way you call me man, and I wish everyone would from now on. So please don't stop. Last word to you, if you don't mind. And I'm actually not offended. I actually do like it. I like it. It's cool. Go ahead. Sorry, Stephen.
Well, I just feel it's another one that kind of points to this kind of democratic deficit that we get in Europe, and like Denmark are not opting into this. Why are they? Why was there not really any big debate in Ireland before we get to this point? But now the horse has bolted, and we have the EU Immigration Pact. It's typical of a kind of like something that runs through the EU, and it's the thing that kind of people feel angry. It angers people about the EU. For me, the EU has only been a positive thing. You know, it opens up the entire, for our youth, you know.
Okay.
Let's talk about our youth and the fact that we can exchange on Erasmus, education, all these different areas, instead of getting married in these.
Our youth are heading for the airport because 70% of them are still in their childhood bedrooms. We don't have a future unless we house our own people. Trying to house the world, this is insane.
And we've over 100,000 empty houses in the country. The housing crisis has been caused by decades of financialization of housing and underinvestment in social housing.
All of you,
to solve the housing crisis.
All of you, Herman, do you want one last word there? Sorry, because I do have to wrap it up now.
I drove through Keenan yesterday. You go past 7 old.
Herman, you're muted.
Ghost estates are still all over the place.
Herman, if you want to make a point, you're going to have to unmute yourself. No, it's okay.
Ultimately, can I just say, perhaps on behalf of all of us, that we might have an agreement. June 7th is right around the corner.
Get out and vote, everybody.
Please get out and vote.
Don't need some 45. Herman, you're still muted. It's not my fault. Okay.
Sorry, my
just
fault,
take 30 seconds.
We must take back control of our borders, that we can control the numbers and the qualities of the people who come in here. Because Joseph Puska, who murdered Ashley Murphy, would not have allowed to be in our country.
You said that at the start. You said
borders.
That. I know, and it's very important too that people have a run through those that have been charged with rape and murder of women in this country, and see where they're actually from.
We need to make Ireland safer
as well.
For sure.
It's the majority is Irish. Okay, listen, thank you very much indeed. I do appreciate it. As Maria said, everyone get out and vote. Obviously, we have people, you might not agree with everyone on this call, but they're all very, very passionate and want your vote. And if what they say, they vibe for you, we'll go for it. All of you, thank you very much indeed. Have a wonderful campaign and the best of luck. Okay, that was the second last of our Midlands Northwest constituency debates. Thank you so much for being involved. We're back tomorrow morning on the radio at 9 o'clock with the 9 till noon show. It's not your usual Friday show because we're continuing our local election debates. Thanks so much for all the feedback, all the texts, all the comments. and recognising that it is quite difficult too, but it's so important that we give everyone a voice. And you might not like what Herman Kelly has to say, or not particularly, or what Anthony Cahill has to say, but they've put their names forward, and as I say, we are giving everyone a platform to speak